Barack Obama looked directly at J.D. Vance, his posture radiating the supreme confidence of a man entirely accustomed to having history yield to his cadence, and instructed the junior senator not to lecture a seasoned community organizer about the fundamental meaning of community. He firmly reminded Vance that he had been pounding the pavement and organizing the marginalized neighborhoods on the unforgiving south side of Chicago long before Vance could even read. The gallery immediately rose to its feet, the sheer electric thrill of the moment triggering an eruption of applause as the isolated clip of that single devastating rebuke hit the internet, amassing a staggering 60,000 shares in a mere 4 minutes because Obama was undeniably and profoundly still Obama. He possessed that unmistakable voice, that hypnotic rhythm, that utterly calculated physical grace, demonstrated in the way he casually tilted the microphone down precisely half an inch after delivering his final syllable, moving with the quiet arrogance of a man who silently suggested the hardware itself was barely worthy of carrying his resonance. There is quite literally nobody on the planet who can deliver a spoken sentence quite like the 44th President of the United States, seamlessly blending moral authority with rhetorical perfection. But the critical anomaly in this meticulously staged environment was that J.D. Vance was not actually looking at him. Vance's eyes were locked downward, his attention entirely consumed by the glowing screen of his laptop, and glowing on that unforgiving digital display was one specific indisputable number, a singular mathematical reality that 7 million live viewers were about to sear into their collective memory, destined to be remembered far longer than any soaring speech Obama had ever delivered. This was not a whispered scandal, or a classified secret extracted from the shadows. It was merely a number, a piece of public record, completely verifiable by anyone with an internet connection. When Vance finally read it aloud in his distinctly flat, unvarnished Ohio drawl, he sounded exactly like the son of a heroin-addicted mother, calmly reading a staggering invoice back to the richest, most insulated man in the room. For the very first time in his charmed political existence, Barack Obama found himself entirely bereft of a speech that could miraculously save him, because the brutal reality of the political arena is that you cannot speechify a number. You cannot apply the abstract concepts of hope and change to a rigid mathematical sum, and a number remains a number regardless of the rhetorical poetry wrapped around it. This particular number possessed a physical address, anchored deep within a historically disenfranchised neighborhood on the south side of Chicago where Obama famously claimed he had fought tooth and nail for the forgotten people. It was the exact same neighborhood where he had just aggressively spearheaded the construction of the single most expensive monument in the history of presidential vanity, a sprawling complex built precisely in the place where the very people he adamantly swore he represented could suddenly no longer afford to live. The heavily promoted event had been grandly billed to the American public as a high-minded conversation about legacy, a civic town hall nestled in the heart of Chicago, supposedly moderated by a strictly neutral party, and featuring a high-stakes dialogue between the sitting Vice President of the United States and the former president, ostensibly designed to explore the innocuous topics of presidential libraries, democratic norms, and ongoing civic engagement. The towering, monolithic Obama Presidential Center had officially opened its doors just 4 weeks prior to this broadcast, and the timing of this televised town hall was anything but accidental, serving as a highly coordinated victory lap designed to cement his historical narrative. Obama had arrived at the venue exactly the way Obama always arrives, carrying the sheer, undeniable gravity of his legacy, moving with the particular practiced magnetism of a man who once commanded the most powerful office on the face of the earth and who has never, not for a single fraction of a second, truly stepped out of the blinding glare of the historical spotlight. He sat down, casually crossed his legs, and adjusted his microphone with the effortless precision of a seasoned statesman who had conducted 10,000 high-profile interviews and no longer needed to consciously think about where the audio equipment was positioned relative to his jawline. He was deeply in his element, holding court on his home turf, surrounded by the familiar aura of the Chicago South Side, basking in the glow of his neighborhood, his meticulously crafted story, and his billion-dollar center. Vance sat directly across from him, his laptop flipped open like a breach in the fortified wall of the establishment, creating a visual contrast that was both brutal and highly deliberate. It pitted the most famous, silver-tongued orator in modern American history against a stoic, unsmiling man armed with nothing more than a ThinkPad and a glowing spreadsheet, a classic framing of David and Goliath, provided that in this modern political iteration, David had discarded his primitive sling and replaced it with the devastating, undeniable precision of a digital calculator. Obama flawlessly opened the evening with 4 uninterrupted minutes of pure, soaring eloquence, invoking the sacred history of the South Side, praising the gritty, unsung community organizers who had originally taught him what grassroots democracy truly meant, and painting a vivid cinematic picture of the young, hopeful people who would inevitably walk through the towering glass doors of his newly minted center and magically see themselves reflected in the grand, sweeping story of America. His voice executed the precise physiological trick it has always done, rising and falling like a carefully composed symphony, filling the cavernous room the exact same way a sudden shift in the weather fills a deep valley. It possessed the unique hypnotic ability to make you completely forget that you were merely watching a calculated political event and making you feel instead that you were participating in something historically profound simply by breathing the same conditioned air. He deployed the phrase "this community" 3 distinct times. He utilized the unifying phrase "our story" twice. He declared with deep manufactured conviction, "I believe in the people of this city." And the packed gallery responded to his cadence exactly as if the sentence were a sacred hymn echoing through a cathedral. Then, with the devastating pivot of a seasoned political predator, he turned his attention toward Vance, the subtle tilt of his head telegraphing an attitude that was not merely dismissive, but aggressively paternal. He stated, his tone dripping with condescending respect, that he acknowledged the vice president had grown up in the crushing poverty of Appalachia, noting that he respected that particular American survival story, but quickly weaponized his own resume by declaring that he had spent his entire career in neighborhoods exactly like this one, organizing on the ground, knocking on dilapidated doors, and actually learning what community means directly from the resilient people who built it, rather than learning about it from the lucrative proceeds of a best-selling book deal. Concluding with a stern warning, he told Vance not to dare lecture him about the concept of community, a flawlessly executed rhetorical strike that caused the room to erupt, not with standard political applause, but with the distinct, overwhelming sound of a royal coronation. It was the deafening roar of a fiercely loyal audience that had eagerly paid the price of admission to watch its undisputed champion systematically dismantle his opponent, and was currently watching that champion do exactly what champions are born to do. Obama's extensive communications team, nervously monitoring the live feed from the darkened wings of the stage, saw exactly what they had desperately wanted to see. The narrative frame firmly established, the moral authority decisively claimed, and the audacious younger man forcefully put back into his proper place by the untouchable elder statesman. Vance, completely undisturbed by the thunderous noise echoing around him, simply waited a calculated 5 seconds, the harsh blue light of the laptop screen reflecting off his face. He deliberately chose not to look up at Obama. He utterly ignored the stinging jab about his book deal. He refused to take the bait regarding his Appalachian origins, and he completely bypassed the stern warning about lecturing on community. Instead, he leaned into his microphone and asked 4 words, "Mr. President, where do you live?" It was the simplest, most fundamental question available in the English language, yet it possessed the destructive force of a kinetic strike, causing the massive room, the very same room that had been joyously coronating its king just seconds prior, to instantly plunge into a suffocating, deeply uncomfortable silence. The silence descended because every single politically aware individual in that room suddenly remembered that the factual answer to that question was absolutely not the gritty, working-class South Side of Chicago. The indisputable answer was Martha's Vineyard, specifically a sprawling, ultra-exclusive $11.75 million waterfront estate situated on a pristine island sanctuary where the median home price hovers aggressively at $1.3 million, where the deeply insulated year-round population is tightly capped at roughly 15,000 wealthy elites, and where the closest thing to a grassroots community organizer is a high-end luxury real estate agent brokering 8-figure transactions. Obama smiled, but the smile was strictly professional, tightly controlled around the edges, the exact facial expression of a seasoned poker player that silently communicates, "I see exactly what you're doing," while desperately trying to suppress the grim realization that says, "And unfortunately, it's working." He smoothly deflected, stating with practiced earnestness that he lives exactly where his beloved family lives, attempting to elevate the discourse by arguing that the true measure of a man is not determined by where he happens to sleep at night, but rather by the location and the people whom he chooses to serve. Vance mercilessly seized upon that exact word, agreeing that they should absolutely discuss where the former president serves, formally suggesting they deeply examine his service to the South Side, meticulously analyze exactly what he had chosen to build there, and, most importantly, ruthlessly dissect exactly what that massive construction project had cost the very people he claimed to champion. Without breaking eye contact with the camera, Vance methodically opened a new digital tab on his laptop, launching into a forensic destruction of the Obama Presidential Center, noting its grand opening on June 19, 2026, and its sprawling footprint of 19.3 acres permanently carved out of Jackson Park, right in the heart of the south side of Chicago. He clinically established it as the single most exorbitantly expensive presidential center ever conceived or constructed in American history, pulling up the original, highly publicized cost estimate of $300 million and violently contrasting it against the staggering finalized construction cost of $850 million, a figure nearly triple the initial promise. He intentionally paused, letting the sheer suffocating gravity of that $850 million price tag sit heavily in the dead air of the auditorium, allowing the audience to process the existence of nearly $1 billion of concentrated wealth parked permanently in a room located on the south side of Chicago, a neighborhood where the median household income struggles to reach $35,000 and where a devastating 1 in 4 residents' lives trapped below the federal poverty line. This astronomical number sat fundamentally differently in this specific room than it would have ever sat within the glass-walled confines of a corporate conference room in lower Manhattan. It sat heavily, immovably, the exact way a massive, oppressive stone monument sits, casting a long, chilling, and inescapable shadow over every single fragile thing attempting to survive around it. Vance preemptively addressed the Obama Foundation's primary defensive talking point, acknowledging their constant public refrain that the sprawling center was entirely privately funded without a single drop of taxpayer dollars, declaring that this specific line of defense was exactly what he intended to surgically dismantle tonight. With the click of another tab, he revealed the hidden municipal ledger, exposing the shocking reality that the state of Illinois and the perpetually cash-strapped city of Chicago had collectively hemorrhaged more than $350 million on massive, specialized infrastructure projects directly and exclusively tied to the operational viability of the Obama Presidential Center. He rattled off the exhaustive list of municipal burdens: widened roads, fortified overpasses, brand new transit connections, and massively expensive underground utility relocations. Noting with forensic precision that while these exorbitant expenditures are technically public record and undeniably funded by the hardworking taxpayers, no consolidated, easily digestible total had ever been willingly published by any responsible oversight agency. Vance weaponized the absurdity of the situation with a devastatingly simple analogy, asking the silent room if he were to build a private mansion, and the city subsequently utilized millions of taxpayer funds to graciously build him a private road, a dedicated sewer line, and a custom bridge just to reach his front door, while forwarding the massive bill directly to the working-class taxpayers. Could he honestly look those taxpayers in the eye and claim his property was entirely privately funded? To ground the staggering macroeconomic figures into a visceral human reality, Vance seamlessly pivoted to the deeply personal story of a specific woman named Denise Williams, painting a vivid portrait of a retired medical professional who had dedicated her life to healing others. Denise, he explained, was a retired nurse who had continuously resided in Woodlawn, the historic neighborhood directly adjacent to the encroaching footprint of the Obama Presidential Center, for 4 unbroken decades. She was a woman who had proudly raised 2 daughters on those specific streets and who had finally earned her retirement after 36 grueling years of loyal service at the nearby University of Chicago Medical Center. Vance laid out the brutal, undeniable math of her existence. In 2019, exactly before the heavy construction equipment rolled in and the dirt was officially turned, her monthly rent was a manageable $1,200. But today, living in the immediate shadow of the monolithic center, her rent had violently skyrocketed to $1,850, representing a crushing 54% increase that fundamentally destabilized her fixed income survival. He delivered the final tragic consequence of this economic displacement, revealing that her daughter and her young granddaughter had been forced to pack their belongings and officially move out of the neighborhood entirely last year, simply because they could no longer financially survive the artificial inflation generated by the center's presence. Vance connected the historical dots with devastating rhetorical precision, reminding the room that the former president had originally built his political brand by organizing in the exact streets of Woodlawn during the harsh realities of the 1980s. He noted that the young Obama had undoubtedly knocked on Denise's literal door, or if not her specific door, then on doors completely identical to hers, and had looked the desperate people of Woodlawn directly in the eye, solemnly swearing that he was dedicating his life to fighting for their community. Yet decades later, he had returned as a titan of global influence and aggressively dropped an $850 million fortress onto their fragile community, triggering a catastrophic economic ripple effect that fundamentally ensured Denise's own flesh and blood could no longer afford to live next door to his towering legacy. Obama aggressively leaned forward in his chair, adopting the distinct, commanding posture of a man who is actively preparing to unleash a rhetorical tidal wave. He began to forcefully counterattack, declaring with deep baritone resonance that the Obama Presidential Center was not a burden, but a profound generational investment in this specific community, insisting that it would act as a massive economic engine, creating thousands of sustainable jobs, drive unprecedented international tourism to the South Side, and provide vital, life-changing educational programming for vulnerable young people. But Vance cut the oxygen out of the room instantly. Mr. President, Denise's rent went up 54%. Is that the investment? The sweeping, majestic speech ground to a sudden, violent halt, not merely because Vance had technically interrupted the former president, but because the underlying nature of the question acted as an impenetrable concrete wall, and Obama's soaring rhetoric slammed headfirst into it the exact same way a rushing river violently collides with a reinforced dam. The sheer kinetic momentum of Obama's delivery awkwardly carried the sentence forward for a fraction of a second after the psychological impact, but the fundamental direction of the energy in the room had irreversibly altered. Changing the direction, tone, and dominance of a room in the very middle of a Barack Obama monologue is an anomaly that simply does not happen, an event that has quite literally never occurred in modern political history. Yet the cold, hard, localized question regarding the precise mathematical increase of Denise's monthly rent had successfully achieved the impossible. It completely neutralized the legendary orator because Denise's rent was an undeniable empirical number, and cold, hard numbers possess absolutely no capacity to care about the beauty of soaring rhetoric. Vance, feeling the structural integrity of his opponent's narrative beginning to fracture, aggressively opened a new digital tab, establishing a relentless methodical rhythm, tab by tab, number by number, revelation by revelation. The new battlefield was strictly focused on the raw acquisition of municipal land. He stated for the record that the sprawling Obama Presidential Center currently sits securely on 19.3 acres of Jackson Park, meticulously detailing that Jackson Park is not vacant urban blight, but rather prime, historically significant public land, directly owned by the financially strained city of Chicago, constantly maintained utilizing the hard-earned tax dollars of the public, and masterfully designed by Frederick Law Olmsted in the 1890s as a democratic sanctuary for the working class. Vance revealed the staggering bureaucratic maneuver that facilitated the land transfer, explaining that the heavily lawyered Obama Foundation had successfully obtained an ironclad lease on this priceless civic asset spanning an incredible 99 years. And then he dropped the ultimate mathematical bombshell. The total finalized price of this century-long lease for 19.3 acres of prime, historical public parkland situated in the heart of a major American metropolis was exactly $10. He deliberately paused his cadence, allowing the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the $10 figure to fully penetrate the consciousness of the stunned audience, repeating the parameters like a prosecuting attorney laying out the elements of a grand larceny. $10 for 99 years of total control, executed with absolutely zero competitive bidding process, intentionally bypassing any transparent public auction, and rubber-stamped by a deeply compliant city council. He painted the transaction as a massive, unprecedented transfer of civic wealth, bluntly stating that the multi-billion-dollar private foundation had essentially taken permanent, exclusive possession of publicly owned land for roughly the equivalent retail price of a deli sandwich. To quantify the exact magnitude of the loss, Vance cited professional localized market data, revealing that the legally estimated fair market value of 19.3 acres of buildable land on the south side of Chicago fluctuated anywhere between $20 million and an astounding $50 million. The intensely capitalized foundation had paid a mere $10, meaning the massive financial gap, a staggering $20 to $50 million in tangible, desperately needed public value, was quietly and legally transferred directly from the bleeding pockets of the taxpayers of Chicago straight into the insulated coffers of a private, opaque foundation completely controlled by the former president of the United States. Vance drove the intellectual stake through the heart of the transaction, vehemently arguing that this maneuver could never be classified as a philanthropic donation. It was, by every legal and moral definition, a massive corporate subsidy. The deeply tragic irony was that the specific people who were forced to heavily subsidize this billionaire-backed vanity project were the exact same vulnerable residents whose monthly rents were violently skyrocketing. Making her devastating second appearance in Vance's forensic narrative, Denise Williams was brought back into the spotlight as he noted that, as a longtime resident, Denise actively pays property taxes, and those specific property taxes are directly allocated to fund the ongoing municipal maintenance of Jackson Park. She had been faithfully paying those exact taxes for 40 consecutive years, meaning 4 decades of Denise's hard-earned, working-class income had actively subsidized the meticulous maintenance of the very same parkland that the city had just casually handed over to a multi-billion-dollar private foundation for a $10 bill. Vance delivered the mathematical kill shot regarding the land deal. Denise Williams literally paid more money out of pocket for her basic monthly Chicago Transit Authority bus pass than the heavily capitalized Obama Foundation had paid to secure 99 years of exclusive control over her community's historical park. Obama fiercely responded to the onslaught, and this time, his meticulously crafted counterattack was not constructed of airy philosophical rhetoric, but rather armed with a carefully selected, heavily vetted institutional fact. He loudly declared that the presidential center was officially projected to generate a staggering, transformative $3.1 billion in direct economic activity throughout the local region over the course of the next decade. He immediately defensive-proofed the massive figure, emphatically noting that this was not a fabricated, self-serving internal estimate, but rather a rigorous, peer-reviewed economic projection officially generated by the prestigious University of Chicago, firmly arguing that the infrastructure investment was a decades-overdue financial injection directly into the veins of the historically neglected South Side. But Vance, possessing the lethal instincts of a street fighter masked as an auditor, recognized the inherent flaw in the macroeconomic defense and struck back with surgical precision. Mr. President, exactly who receives the $3.1 billion? The framing of the counter question was utterly masterful. He relentlessly focused on the brutal realities of urban distribution. He coldly explained to the room that $3.1 billion of raw economic activity aggressively injected into a fragile neighborhood, currently undergoing rapid, unchecked gentrification, absolutely does not translate into $3.1 billion of wealth for the vulnerable people currently living there. It historically and inevitably means $3.1 billion of highly concentrated wealth reserved exclusively for the affluent demographic who will inevitably move in only after the current, deeply rooted residents can no longer afford to stay and are forced into exile. Vance reminded the audience that he had grown up in a forgotten, rusting Appalachian neighborhood where the elite political promises of economic development always translated into shiny new businesses catering exclusively to wealthy new arrivals, while the original discarded population was forced to watch the supposed prosperity unfold from the depressing confines of aging trailer parks. He summarized the dynamic with a brutal, folksy clarity. The profound difference between the two concepts is exactly the difference between the government building a massive luxury shopping mall directly in your impoverished neighborhood and you actually possessing the disposable income required to shop at it. Obama strategically chose not to directly answer the devastating inquiry regarding wealth distribution, immediately executing a flawless, highly polished pivot back toward the impenetrable shield of community programming, youth mentorship initiatives, advanced job training seminars, and unprecedented educational access. The rhetorical pivot was incredibly smooth, executed with the supreme muscular professionalism of a political titan who had successfully utilized that exact same evasive maneuver to effortlessly glide through 15 years of hostile press conferences. But tonight, stripped of the usual protective layers of media deference, the mechanical nature of the pivot was glaringly, uncomfortably visible. It was exposed in the exact same jarring manner that a stage magician's sleight of hand becomes painfully obvious once you finally know exactly where to focus your eyes, and this live audience was absolutely refusing to look away from the trick. Smelling blood in the water, Vance ruthlessly opened the tab that fundamentally altered the trajectory of the entire evening, pointing out the glaring deception that what the complex is not is the exact specific thing its grand institutional name deliberately implies to the American public. He methodically explained the legal architecture of presidential history, noting that absolutely every other official presidential library currently existing within the United States is strictly operated, maintained, and heavily overseen by the federal authority of the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA. However, in a quiet, highly strategic maneuver executed in 2017, the deep-pocketed Obama Foundation deliberately chose to legally opt out of the stringent, federally mandated NARA system altogether. The true motivation behind this unprecedented secession was entirely driven by a desire to avoid a strict federal statute requiring all official presidential libraries to maintain a massive, untouchable financial endowment equal to exactly 60% of their total construction costs. Vance performed the brutal mental math live on stage at an astronomically bloated construction cost of $850 million. That federally mandated protective endowment would have required the foundation to lock away an astounding $510 million in dead capital. By legally opting out, the foundation magically saved itself from raising and freezing $500 million in required endowment funds, while simultaneously granting itself absolute, unchecked dictatorial freedom over the massive building's architectural design, ongoing community programming, and ultimate political mission, completely free from the burdensome oversight of federal regulators. The most devastating revelation, Vance noted, was that the official, classified presidential records generated during the 8 years of the historic Obama administration are currently held entirely separately by NARA in a completely different, heavily secured federal facility located far outside the city limits of Chicago. They are absolutely not located inside the walls of the so-called Obama Presidential Center. He ruthlessly described exactly what the complex actually contains: a high-end commercial museum, a pristine indoor basketball court, a meticulously curated vegetable garden, a whimsical rooftop playground, an artificial winter sledding hill, and the sprawling corporate headquarters of the Obama Foundation itself. It does not contain a single page of the original historical papers belonging to the 44th President of the United States. He summarized the entire operation with a crushing rhythmic finality. It is loudly marketed to the world as the Obama Presidential Center, but it is legally not a presidential library. It is, in stark reality, nothing more than a private foundation headquarters equipped with a lucrative gift shop and an artificial sledding hill, aggressively built on heavily subsidized public land, miraculously obtained for a $10 bill, entirely surrounded by $350 million in taxpayer-funded infrastructure upgrades. Situated directly in the heart of a historically black neighborhood where working-class rents have violently increased by 54%. Pivoting his merciless assault from philosophical debate to structural accountability, J.D. Vance systematically dismantled the glittering facade of the Obama Presidential Center, exposing the billion-dollar monument not as a genuine presidential library, but as a heavily subsidized corporate playground that deliberately dodged federal oversight while sitting on historic public land obtained for a miraculous $10 bill. With the lethal, emotionless precision of a seasoned auditor, Vance weaponized the brutal arithmetic of the South Side, dropping the revelation of a massive $40 million racial discrimination lawsuit filed by black contractors and highlighting the tragic irony of a former community organizer returning as a billionaire to gentrify his old neighborhood, causing a retired nurse's rent to violently spike by 54%. When Barack Obama finally rose to defend his legacy, he delivered an absolute masterclass in political oratory, a sweeping, era-defining 3-minute speech echoing with the moral cadence of Martin Luther King Jr. But as his final beautiful syllable faded into the rafters, he was met with a deafening, unnatural silence from a paralyzed audience that could no longer unhear the damning numbers. This chilling moment of political mortality instantly birthed a 29 million view viral phenomenon universally dubbed the speech that failed, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction of bipartisan federal audits, IRS investigations, and panicked municipal resolutions that completely shattered the foundation's sanitized PR machine. The cold, unyielding mathematical truth had finally defeated the most gifted orator in modern American history, proving that soaring rhetoric cannot mask the devastating reality of displacement and structural hypocrisy, but as the subpoenas fly and the walls of this $850 million fortress begin to crack under the weight of its own undeniable ledger. The true reckoning is only just beginning. What other explosive secrets are buried beneath the concrete of Jackson Park, and who is destined to take the ultimate fall when this historic house of cards finally collapses?